Restoration. We're going to be looking today at the blessing of Isaac, which is meant for Esau, but is stolen by Jacob. We're going to be looking specifically at verses 26 through 29. Then his father Isaac said to him, "Come near and kiss me, my son." So he came near and kissed him. And Isaac smelled the smell of his garments and blessed him and said, "See, the smell of my son is as the smell of the field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you the dew of heaven and the fatness of earth and the plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and the nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you." So that's the blessing. It's meant for Esau, but it's stolen by Jacob. And it's important to see a couple of things. You know, Isaac is giving a blessing here according to the tradition of the ancient world. This is the law, which they call the law of primogeniture. That is, the first son gets the majority of the blessing of the family. He gets 2/3 of the inheritance. He gets the authority of the patriarch of the family when the father dies. And that's basically what he's saying here, is you're going to get blessed with material prosperity. The Lord will bless you, and you will gain my authority, and your brothers will serve you, which is, according to the tradition of the ancient world, how the family passed from one generation to the next, the goods of the family. But, you know, this is manipulation because of Rebekah and Jacob scheming. The words fall on Jacob rather than Esau. And it's important to see that, you know, even though this is going to be discovered, Esau can't take it back. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a couple of days here. Our words are not something that we can just take back. And that's a really important thing to realize in life. Today we imagine that words are cheap, and just like you can hit the backspace button on the computer, you can hit backspace on the words that come out of your mouth. But most of you who are married or have children know that's not the case. Words cannot just be taken back. We're going to explore that more later on. But for right now, what I want to talk a little bit about is the way that this manipulation is happening here. It is coming from a lack of trust in the promises of God, and it ends up causing more problems in life than it would be just to trust the Lord. You know, we already received a promise here from the Lord himself to Rebekah. Her children are struggling in her womb. She inquires of the Lord. And in verse 23 of chapter 25, the Lord speaks to Rebekah and says, "Two nations are in your womb, and two people from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." And this is sort of like what you see with the story of Abraham and Sarah. God makes a promise, but the wife is not wanting to wait, right? So the Lord makes a promise to Abraham, for example, that he shall bear a son. It doesn't come to pass for quite some time. Sarah gets impatient. She says, you know, have a baby with my maidservant, and Ishmael is born. And of course that creates all kinds of problems. And it comes from this lack of trust in the promises of God. Well, we see the same thing with Rebekah, right? There's this promise given, but she doesn't want to wait. She wants to take things into her own hands. And so she manipulates Isaac, tricks him with Jacob. And so the blessing falls to Jacob instead of Esau. So she takes matters into her own hands to get the outcome that she wants. The interesting thing about it is it doesn't actually work. And what I mean by that is the blessing about the brothers serving you. He says, "You will be Lord over your brothers, and your mother's sons will bow down to you." That actually doesn't come to pass. In the story, if you follow the story of Jacob and Esau never ends up serving Jacob. And in fact, in the lifetime of Jacob and Esau, if there anything is the case, it's Jacob's. Jacob bows down to Esau, and what I mean by that is, Jacob steals this, and then he runs for his life, and Esau hates him because he did not get the blessing, and the family's torn apart, and there's vengeance, and then Jacob's far away from his family for years and years, and then he is forced to return because he's on the run from Laban. You remember all this story, but he comes back to Esau, and he's scared to death because he thinks Esau is going to kill him, right? And what we actually see is when Jacob returns to Esau, right? Esau is just overflowing with mercy and love for Jacob. And so there's no servitude here. And in fact, Jacob is in this place of crisis, and he's very weak, and his family is weak. They've been traveling forever. He comes and before his brother, and he again tries to manipulate as his mother taught him. But Esau is just merciful and kind, and Jacob begins to call Esau Lord again and again. Right? He tries to buy off Esau's love by saying, "This is a present sent to my Lord Esau." So Jacob here is actually in the position of the servant to the Lord, to his brother Esau as the Lord. He presents himself this way and again, right? To appease him. He calls him Lord over and over again, right? So what I think is super interesting about it, I think it's 3 times. I didn't mark them off here. Here it is down here. There's one of them. So Esau, let me leave with you some of the people who are with me. But he said, that is Jacob, what need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord. Right? So he does it 3 different times. He calls him Lord. So what's interesting about this is, my point is this. You think the prophecy is that Esau is going to serve Jacob. First of all, we tend to read the prophecy of God that way. The older shall serve the younger, right? Okay, that's the prophecy of God. The older is going to serve, so Esau's going to serve Jacob. And then Jacob steals the blessing, and the blessing says that you will be Lord over your brothers to Jacob, right? So the older will serve the younger, but it actually never happens in the life of Jacob and Esau. Not as it's written. There's no account of it at all. What you realize is, so cool, is the original words, the promise of God, are about 2 nations. And from Jacob comes the nation of Israel, and from Esau comes the nation of Edom. And it is the case that in history, the Edomites will be taken over by the Israelites, and the Edomites will serve the Israelites. And so what you see is the promise of God, which you and I tend to read in one lifetime, like God's promise is for the life of Jacob and Esau. This is actually not a word about Jacob and Esau. God's promise is to be fulfilled. This is to be fulfilled hundreds of years later. Right? They don't know that. So they try to make something happen. Remember, Rebecca tries to make something happen, and you and I think this is going to happen in the lifetime, that Jacob will be Lord over his brothers, but it never happens. It does happen, but it happens centuries later. And I think, again, this teaches us something. One, God's promises are fulfilled in his timeline, not ours. Right? When we manipulate them to try to make them follow our time frame, we get ourselves into big trouble, which is what Rebecca and Jacob did. But secondly, this, God is concerned with generations far beyond ours. And if you can grab hold of this, it will change your perspective on your life. You know, what God's doing with you now, what God's working on your life now, the promises that God's placing before you now, you know, it's quite possible or even likely that it's not for you. It's for maybe not even your children. But God's doing something now for your children's children's children, hundreds of years from now. That's the way that God works. God's a God of generations. And once you grasp this and you start to realize the wonder and the awe of God's work in your life, because God's sowing seeds now that won't bear fruit for hundreds of years, right? And once you grasp that, then you realize your life isn't about what you can accomplish. Your life is about what you can impart. Your life is about being a link in the chain. It's about preparing the way for the Lord, right? And then it humbles you, and it causes you to think closer and closer to eternity, right? You start thinking more about the big picture, right? You know, so much destruction, I believe, happens in our world today because we only think about our own lifetime, and we think about what we can accomplish in our lifetime, or what we can enjoy in our lifetime, right? And so we try to come up with quicker and cheaper and faster ways of pleasing ourselves and satisfying ourselves rather than living in and for the next generation, right? Rather than trying to impart something of great value to the next generation, because you realize that what they have, right, what they are going to live through is as important as what you're living through. This is something we've lost in the last few generations, you know. Before you even heard of, you know, several generations ago, you heard about that. People living in poverty, but striving because they wanted their children to have a better life, right? They're going to work hard now so that their children wouldn't have to work so hard. And something's happened along the way where we've reversed that, right? We're more concerned about enjoying and accomplishing the things of our own life, even at the expense of our children, right? Even at the expense of our children's children, right? The point I'm trying to get to see here is it's a godly and biblical thing to think the long-term longevity, think beyond our lifetime, think about the generations to come, and to impart and to sow into those generations, right? And once we grab hold of this, then we realize, oh, there's a great mystery here. What a wonderful thing to be a part of. It's humbling and inspiring all at once. So Lord, teach us this vision. Teach us to recognize your promises aren't just for us, but your promises are for generations to come. Teach us, Lord, to see our place as in preparation and impartation to the generations that will follow. And I pray, Lord, you will do great things through them, things that, Lord, are greater than what we see today. Lord, and I pray, Lord, that we don't in any way cause a stumbling block for them. Lord, I pray, Lord, that we would just raise them up. Show us how to do this, Lord, that we might be servants of your promises and purpose. In the name of Jesus, amen.